Welcome back to Live from Paris here on France 24. It's time now for us to take a look at what is being talked about in the media. We're joined by our media expert, James Creedon, here in the studio.
Good evening, Catherine. How are you?
Good evening. Very well. We're going to be talking about something we've been mentioning quite a bit in the news. Nicolas Sarkozy giving a keynote speech and almost on the campaign trail ahead of the presidential elections.
That's right. So the French media have been keeping a very close eye all evening on what he's been saying down in Toulon, where he made this historic speech, or so he wanted it to appear in any case, about the euro crisis. Now, I suppose a lot of the news websites have been live blogging it as the evening went on, and one of the most, I suppose, prestigious political journalists in France, Arnaud Le Parmentier for the Le Monde newspaper, says he tweeted a very poor speech by Nicolas Sarkozy, nothing new for now. So he essentially said that we learned nothing from the speech and that it was a pretty poor speech. So that's, I suppose, one of the initial outcomes. What we're also seeing is he discussed quite extensively the 35-hour working week in France, which is a big political, I suppose, issue, and also retirement at 60. Now, these are two issues that would very much divide the left and the right in France, and Nicolas Sarkozy is more than likely going to go present himself for re-election next year. So clearly you can see that though he wanted to bring up those election issues during this speech, which was supposedly just a presidential speech. Now Le Figaro is saying that he's half president, half candidate for 2012. Half, exactly. Now the thing is, that's controversial, because a 1995 law regulating campaign financing and all of that doesn't allow a president to campaign essentially until he has declared himself as a candidate, and he hasn't done that yet. So he's definitely operating in a little bit of a grey zone now.
And using state finances, I guess, to campaign or not campaign, depending on how you see it.
Right, which the Socialists and the Green Party and others who have presidential candidates can't do. They have to rely on party funding. Now, those on the right will say, look, this is the privilege for every incumbent, get over yourselves. This is just how it works everywhere. It's called politics. But I suppose others who would like to see the letter of the law applied are saying this isn't how things should be done. Now, one other tweet worth showing, this is kind of interesting. This is a journalist by the name of Anne-Laure Danier, who was in Toulon for the speech. She claims that Sarkozy's people didn't want the TV crews down there to film busloads of UMP and Sarkozy supporters coming in for this Toulon speech. Why? Because it looked a little bit that would look a little bit too much like a campaign rally. And of course, this wasn't a campaign rally. This was a serious presidential speech on the economy. Or was it? See? So this grey zone is what some journalists are focusing on.
OK, plenty to discuss there. But moving back to the speech itself, we have been talking about this a little. It's not the first time he's made a big speech in Toulon. It's rather symbolic, in fact, that he's chosen to go back there. That's
right. And Orban, interestingly, it's a radio station here, has said how, you make these speeches are, very much important, an important symbolic part of a presidency, as you said. But how often do presidents stick to their word in terms of what is said? And in Toulon, the speech was more about the global economic crisis, the subprime crisis, but actually not a huge amount has changed since that speech in terms of policy in France. He essentially said the idea that the markets are all powerful, the idea that the markets are always right, is a crazy idea. So what we saw in the speech in 2008 was a swing, kind of a veering to the left and more to greater regulation of markets. Now, 3 years on, I suppose big business bosses, their salaries have gone up by 24% in the last 12 months, apparently. So in Orban, on this article, they're pointing out a lot of things that weren't really implemented after that very, I suppose, popular speech in 2008. So I suppose what the point to be made there is that these speeches are very symbolic. The style is very important. They mark important reference points in a presidency. But really, what about the substance and what, do they stick to them? Another example of that was in 2008 in Grenoble, where he made a big speech about law and order after an armed robber was shot dead and there were riots and everything. He went down there to make this big speech about law and order. And, well, a lot of what he said wasn't really implemented. So these presidential speeches are a feature of French politics, but often more about style than substance. OK, very interesting. Perhaps more fluff than actual concrete, so to speak. OK, well, let's look to a bit of a lighter note, the lighter side of politics now. Twitter as a bit of a popularity contest. Yes, indeed. Now,
who would ever think of such an idea?
I know. I mean, Eric Besson, for one, not very original perhaps, but anyway, he's the industry minister, and he's notorious in France because he used to be a socialist. Then he decided to cross over to Sarkozy's party, and he became a very hardline immigration minister. So this change in track made him quite unpopular with many, but he's become one of the most popular politicians in France on Twitter. And people are saying, how can you be unpopular in real life and popular on Twitter? I mean, what does that say about people who use Twitter?
Does he tweet in his sleep?
Well, almost. And this is the point. He's tweeting all the time. So I suppose if you tweet all the time, people think you must be really cool, so I'll follow you. But in any case, what Les Inrecuptibles have done is they've given the five reasons why he has become so popular. He tweets all the time. He tweets himself. A lot of politicians who tweet, they get, they're what would you say, they're stooges to do it for them. He live tweets on various events. He respects netiquette. And if he makes a false tweet or makes a mistake of some kind, he apologises for it. One example of that is where he tweeted to his girlfriend, who's much younger than him. It's kind of a big, I suppose, showbiz people like to focus on it here. He said, "When I get home, I'm going straight to bed with you?" ? And then obviously everyone was laughing at him and he apologised. So anyway, he knows how to use Twitter well and it's made him more popular.
And everybody loves a bit of juice. Thanks very much, James Creedon, always juicy on Media Watch. Well, it's time now for Web News with a look at how Russians are preparing to combat election fraud and how Arabic is making a Twitter takeover.